Chapter 29. Mchl calls his wisdom to counsel, and the points to be discussed puzzle them. An early walk. An old friend with a changed face. To describe Michael Armstrong's feelings as he took his solitary way along what seemed to him the most unfrequented fields he could find would be both a difficult and unnecessary task. That his heart swelled with thankfulness and joy cannot be doubted, yet there was a vagueness and uncertainty as to what he ought to immediately do, which made him anxious and sad, even in the midst of hope and joy. The small sum he had been able to save from his wages had been spent, or very nearly so, since he set out upon his eventful expedition. He had already accepted a loan from the friendly old coachman of Miss Brotherton, and he shrunk from the idea of contracting more debts, while unable to say with certainty when they should be paid. How then was he to reach his brother in his happy, distant home? And where and how was he to pass the anxious interval that must of necessity intervene before he could even know to what point he should direct his pilgrim steps, even had he the means of setting forth? The path he had taken proved to be a short cut leading into the high road from Fairley to Ashley, and on quitting the fields he found himself close to the door of a public house, which he was tempted to select for his shelter as long as he remained in the neighborhood, both because it was lonely and because it was humble. Having entered there, bespoken a bed, and made a very frugal repast, he inquired the distance to Dowling Lodge, and finding it was greater than he could traverse on foot with any hope of returning in decent time to occupy his newly taken lodging, he resolved to wait till the following morning, when, by setting off at daybreak, he might be able to make his visit to Martha, and perhaps report the result of it to Mr. Bell before he slept. His mind had too much on which to employ itself for him to feel the afternoon a long one. An orchard close behind the little inn afforded him shade and soft turf whereon to sit or lie, or pace backwards and forth with unequal steps, as he meditated on the chances for and against his ever being one in the thrice happy party described by Miss Brotherton. Nor had he wearied of these exciting but most anxious thoughts, when the moon and the stars and the heavy dew warned him at length that the day was gone and night come. And then he remembered that, in order to follow Mr. Bell's advice, he must prepare himself with a letter to Miss Martha, which would be necessary to write before he went to bed. Fortunately, his hotel was able to furnish the needful implements, and after a little reflection, he penned the following note. A poor lad, to whom Miss Martha Dowling once showed much charitable kindness, is now waiting at the park gates to know if he may pay his duty to her. He takes the freedom of asking for this favor because he has been told that she would be pleased to hear he was alive and well. Having directed this to Miss Martha Dowling and sealed it in the best manner he could, he retired to his little bed in a state of mind that hovered between inexpressible felicity and anxiety that he was hardly able to bear. He was afoot in time to hear the lark's first overtures on the following morning, and his spirits, cheered by the bracing influence of the delicious hour, and by the sound sleep which had preceded it, enabled him to breakfast on a slice of brown bread, bespoke the night before, and laid ready for him, with a draught of icy cold water from a neighbouring well, without any mixture of melancholy, though he thought the while of all the dangers and difficulties he might have to encounter ere he stood beside his Edward on the beautiful terrace to which his dreams had transported him so easily. Mchl was a stout walker, and had reached the well-remembered precincts of Dowling Lodge soon after the earliest servants were stirring. He had made up his mind to be the bearer of his own letter, and accordingly, having shown the address to the woman at the lodge as a reason for being permitted to enter, he approached the stately mansion by the road which led to the offices, and entrusting his epistle to the first female he encountered, requested her to deliver it to Miss Martha without delay. "Why, she bain't up yet," said the girl, looking at him, however, with the good-humoured smile which light-hearted young damsels are wont to greet such very handsome lads as our Mchl. "But perhaps you'll be so good as to let her have it as soon as she is awake," he replied, returning the smile. "Well, poor thing, and that may be now, most likely, returned, turned the girl, for her cough often wakes her before this time. Will you wait for an answer? I won't trouble the servants by staying here, replied Michael, but if you please tell the young lady that I will walk up and down the road till she can let me have it. Does Miss Martha walk out early in the mornings, as she used to do? He asked. That's just what she likes best, poor thing, replied the girl. But you needn't be afeard that she's gone out already, for if she had, I shouldn't be sure to have seed her, for she never has the great door open for her at this time of the day, for fear of disturbing my lady, who always lies unaccountably late. And does Sir Matthew rise early now? Demanded Michael with some anxiety. He? Not he. He eats and sleeps like a pig, they say, but he is grumpier than ever he was, both the men and maids too, since he married the new lady. I wonder as I never happened to see you before, as you seem to know 'em all so well. It is several years since I was last here, returned Michael. But run up the stairs with it, there's a dear girl, will you? Because I want to get my answer and be off. You had better stop here till I come down again, replied his good-natured messenger, instead of walking up and down the road without knowing whether there's an answer or no. Sit down in the kitchen, and I'll be back in no time. And into the kitchen he went, the selfsame kitchen which just 8 years before had been the scene of his painful examination by Sir Matthew Dowling's servants. He remembered the room perfectly, could have pointed out the exact spot where the awful housekeeper sat, and the place where he had himself stood, with no better champion to sustain his courage than the greasy kitchen maid, whose pitying broad face bent over him, he recollected, as perfectly as if it had been beamed upon him but the day before. He was still deeply revolving these interesting reminiscences and the strange contrast they offered to his present hopes, when his envoy returned. Miss Martha wants to know your name, young man, she said, but she is getting up and will be walking in the park as usual, she says, presently, so it is all likely enough that she will give you the answer herself. Very well, Michael said, perfectly satisfied. Good morning. I'm very much obliged to you. But you haven't told me your name, and Miss Martha says she should like to know it. My name isn't one that would make any difference, he replied, so I won't trouble you to go up again about that. Good-bye. And without waiting for any further discussion, he walked off, exceedingly well pleased at having arranged the wished-for tete-a-tete so satisfactorily. The noble dimensions of the park enabled Michael to select a space amply sufficient for his promenade, which was neither within sight of the mansion nor the lodge, and ere he had made many turns upon it, he perceived the lady he wished to see approaching him. He could not doubt that it was Martha, for at that hour of the morning none other was at all likely to be there, but she was too much altered for him to recognize her in any degree. He thought she was taller than he had expected to see her, but at any rate she was greatly thinner, and so delicately pale that her appearance was rather a contrast than a resemblance to what he had expected to meet. She was already near him when he turned upon the path and met her. He stopped, took off his hat, and bowed respectfully. You are Miss Martha Dowling, ma'am? He said interrogatively. Yes, replied Martha, that is my name, but when I did see you before, young man, I do not know you. It is a great many years, Miss Martha, but I can never forget your kindness. The pale cheek of Martha was tinted with a vivid blush as she exclaimed, If it were possible, if I did not know that he was dead. But this is nonsense, she added, recovering her composure. I quite forget your person, young man, she continued after a pause. But if I have ever done you any service, I am glad of it. Perhaps if you tell me your name, I may remember the circumstances to which you allude. Oh, Miss Martha, replied Michael, I am afraid my name will startle you, and therefore I do not like to speak it. But I think it came into your head just now, only you stopped short and said it was impossible. Can it be Michael Armstrong that I see? Demanded Martha in an agitated voice. It is, Miss Martha, he replied. It is Michael Armstrong, come back to thank you for all your great kindness to him. My kindness to Michael Armstrong? She exclaimed. Alas, it was I who occasioned all his sufferings, and, as I have thought for many years, his death. How is it you have been saved, Michael? How is it that you have escaped from the horrid place which I was the cause of your being sent? My dear Miss Martha, returned Michael, greatly affected by her look of ill health, and by the agitation she displayed, for tears were trickling fast down her pale cheeks. "My dear Miss Martha," he said, "I know, if nobody else does, the kind motive that you had for every word you spoke. And was it not I myself that said I wanted to go, Miss Martha, when we walked together from here down to poor mother's house? Never, never can I thank you enough for all your goodness then, as well as at all other times, from the very first moment that I ever saw you." "Thank God!" cried poor Martha, fervently clasping her hands and raising her eyes to heaven. "You know not, Michael, what a load you have taken from my heart. I have for years lived under the dreadful weight of believing myself to be your murderer. The thought has haunted me by night, and rarely quitted me by day, and my poor father too. This crime at least he is not to answer for." Michael could not help thinking, though for other words he would not have lessened her piteous satisfaction by uttering the thought, that though he had escaped with life from the terrible suffering to which he had been exposed, he owed Sir Matthew but little gratitude for it. Fortunately, however, for his veracity, he was not called upon to answer this observation, for Martha immediately added, "Does Miss Brotherton know that you are alive, Michael?" "No, Miss Martha, she does not," he replied. "My brother Edward is living with her in some place abroad. Until yesterday I have existed in the dismal belief that he was dead, and that I had not a single relation in the whole world." "And where are you living, Michael? What is your home now, and how did you escape from the dismal place to which you were sent as an apprentice?" In answer to this, Michael related, as briefly as he could contrive to do it, all that had happened to him, confessing freely that he had run away, and that he had supposed he was liable to be sent back again to work out his time if Sir Matthew discovered that he was alive, and if it were his pleasure to do it. "We will not talk anything of that kind, Michael," said Martha, a bright blush again visiting her cheek. "It would not be prudent, certainly, for you to make yourself known here, and I particularly desire that you will not do it. I am grateful, oh, most grateful, for your coming to tell me the dismal news of your death was not true. But now that you have set my heart at rest on that score, do not come here again, Michael. Lady Clarissa is very particular about everybody that comes to the house, and, in short, though I shall always have the greatest regard for you, Michael, I would a great deal rather you did not come to Dowling Lodge again." Michael perfectly understood, though it was evident she would not avow it, that poor Martha had fears for his safety, should Sir Matthew discover him, and without giving her the slightest reason to suppose that he saw this, he assured her that he was going immediately from Ashley, without any intention of returning to it. Martha then looked at her watch, and seeing that there was still above an hour to spare before the usual time at which the family came down stairs, venturing to seat herself on the trunk of the newly felled tree while she questioned the youth, from whom she still felt the strongest interest, as to what his projects were, and when, and how, he thought of leaving England to join his brother. With frank and touching simplicity, Michael entered freely into all his harassing doubts and difficulties, confessing that he had not a shilling in the world that he could call his own, and worse still, that it would not help feeling a strong repugnance to throwing himself wholly on the charity of Miss Brotherton, for no other reason in the world than because she had nobly provided for his brother. "To know that Edward is alive, and not endeavour to see him, is impossible," he continued, "but I would fain earn money enough, if it were possible, to enable me to get to him without being chargeable to her, and once within reach of him, once near enough to his dwelling place, to know that we need never be many days asunder, I should not fear but that I might earn my living without being indebted to charity for it. I was always stronger than Edward, you know, Miss Martha, and there is no reason because he lives an idle life, dear fellow, that I should do so too." "Michael," she replied, her whole countenance lighting up with the most animated expression of pleasure, "my dear Michael Armstrong, your coming here is certainly the greatest blessing that heaven could have sent me. I cannot tell you, and you can never know, all that I have suffered from believing that you were dead, and from knowing that I had been the cause of great and terrible suffering to you, and that too wholly owing to the trust which you and your poor mother reposed in me. May you never, my dear boy, know what it is to have a conscience burdened as mine has been. Be very sure that it is worse than anything that you could have suffered at the Deep Valley, Michael. When you see Mary Brotherton, tell her that I owned this to you, and perhaps she may think, at last, that she judged me rather more harshly than I deserved." If she judged you harshly at all, she was very wrong, replied Michael warmly. People should know before they judge. Nobody who really knew you could judge you harshly. I had rather that kind sentence came from your lips than from those of any other human being. If you can say it and mean it too, as I am sure you do, who is there living who has the right to say the contrary? Yet this is not my only pleasure. I happen to have the power, and I bless my poor father for it, of making some little atonement for the years of suffering that I so unwittingly caused you. From the day we were each of us 15, we have received an allowance of £60 a year for dress, and though I never really wanted one half so much as my sisters, my father, who has ever been a kind father to me, has always insisted upon my having the same, and at the marriage of my 2 elder sisters he gave me £100 each time, that I might be smart. But I have no taste for finery, Michael. It has always made me very melancholy. So I am very rich. I really do not know how rich, for I've always kept on laying the banknotes that I did not want in a drawer, and I've never counted them. Think of it, will not the pleasure for me now to open that drawer and give you all that is in it? Oh, with what different feelings shall I go to bed tonight from any I have felt for years past? I'm sure that there will be enough to take you to Italy, or wherever else Miss Brotherton may be gone, and to set you up in some little business into the bargain. Wait here only 10 minutes, my dear Michael, and I will return with my treasure, a real treasure now, and for the first time that I ever thought it so. Martha had risen from her seat as she spoke, and literally before Michael could recover from his astonishment sufficiently to answer her, she was already at some distance from him. He had by no means settled to his satisfaction the question of whether he ought, or ought not, to strip the generous Martha of her little hoard, when she again appeared, but she looked hurried and out of breath. "Make haste, Michael, dear Michael," she said with much agitation. "For pity's sakes, let not me be again plunged into all the misery of self-reproach from which I have so recently escaped. Take this parcel, Michael. Nay, never stay to count them. My father has left his room, may have inquired for me, and even now may be following me. Bless you, Michael, bless you. Go, go, for the goodness sake, and leave the country as quickly as possible." With these words she turned from him, and with a step too rapid for her state of health, and plainly showing her extreme anxiety, she hastily retreated towards the house. Though after hearing Mr. Bell's decided opinion that no further danger was to be feared from Sir Matthew Dowling, Michael would himself have felt not the least desire to run away from him, yet it was impossible not to perceive that Martha was in a different mind, and that for some reason or other she was exceedingly anxious that he should not remain near Dowling Lodge, or, in other words, within her father's reach. Whether she were right or wrong in fancying that it was necessary for his safety that he should keep out of the way, he felt that it would be cruel to oppose her, and with the unexamined roll of banknotes thrust into his coat pocket, he gave but one farewell look at the retreating drapery of poor Martha, and then, with rapid strides and thoughts so full of the scene which had just passed, that he followed the right path rather mechanically than from judgment, he set off upon his return to the humble lodgings he had secured for the night.